Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, it's good to be back in the Manchester area. This area where back in the 90s and early 2000s, I'd have at least a couple of meetings every month here in the city centre, and then a few more sort of on the outskirts, in most of all in the Oldham area, which was my home base. And even before my time, this particular part of Manchester, Sale, was the home base, as it happens, for a couple of my oldest comrades, dating back way before my time when I was nobbut a lad, as they say up north, which has to be translated for our southern friends. But a couple of my oldest comrades, including the late Richard Edmonds, who most nationalists associate with London, of course, who lived here in Sale in the 1970s, and also another friend of mine who's the author of the booklet on Sale. He was also lived in Sale in the 1970s. A little bit later on than that, in my time, there's an especially notorious association between the Manchester area and the most violent and vile forms of militant anti-fascism. And that connection goes right up from the lowest in the land, from the gutters of the most violent elements in Manchester, to the very highest in the land, to Her Majesty's Attorney General, Lord Hermer. As it was here in Manchester that the young Ricky Hermer organised a militant, anti-fascist Jewish youth movement, a militant movement whose very newspaper, the name of their very newspaper, On Guard, was a tribute to Jewish terrorism of the 1940s and the 1943 group, and who here in Manchester in the 1990s, in the early 1990s, was proud to name as his political mentor the organiser of violent anti-fascism in this area, the convicted kidnapper Steve Tilsey. Right-hand man in those days was the late and unlamented Desi Noonan, who, not very far from here, in a certain corner of South Manchester, physically threatened a BNP organiser who was starting to organise a South Manchester branch, and went up to him in a pub and said, "You know who I am, I'm Desi Noonan, i.e. a gangland assassin and drug dealer who'd killed more than 20 people." And eventually, as such people do, met a similar end himself. Those people come and gone. Those people, criminal elements, the Irish terrorist elements, have been exploited by their ultimate masters and gone to an early grave. The organiser of student anti-fascism in the 1990s has, however, gone on to greater things and is now Lord Hermer, His Majesty's Attorney General. Such is a microcosm of British and European politics, the way that the violent street army of anti-fascism is merely used as the spearhead of even more sinister forces. So, having been through all that background in Manchester in those days, having left a bit of blood on the pavement on one occasion when in Longsight, when those types of people decided they were going to try and rob me. Yeah, those were quite hectic days, and I'm especially glad to be here with you today, friends and comrades, as nationalism rebuilds with new force, as a new patriotic organisation takes up the struggle, both on the streets, at the ballot box, in the meeting rooms, in written publications and online. Wherever that battle takes us, we are there. Now, of course, the nationalist scene has changed a little bit since my earliest days in Manchester, one way or another. And I'll perhaps have to shock a few social media nationalists by admitting something. I don't detest ethno-nationalism. I don't detest the far right. I don't detest neo-Nazis. Perhaps that's why I'll never be leadership material for a mainstream party. I don't look for ways to make myself acceptable to the mainstream, whether that mainstream is defined by social media trillionaires, Westminster politics, or the Israeli government, its fellow travellers. Passing through Manchester, passing through the city centre, I don't have to look too hard to find the things I do detest. But I'm not going to make this speech into evidence for the prosecution by listing those objects worthy of detestation. More important than what we detest is what we intend to do about it. And here, we can learn lessons, not only from British nationalist movements of past decades, but from a much broader political history. One of the most important lessons is that the wokeism, broader liberalism that afflict our society today didn't come from nowhere. White societies, and especially Anglo-American societies, have for generations been damaged by what we can diagnose as hyper-individualism. Margaret Thatcher was an example of this. She said in an interview, strangely enough, I think it was for a women's magazine, something like Woman's Own or something like that. You'll find it online, the origin of this famous statement, this famous interview. I think it was for a women's magazine in the 80s when she was Prime Minister. Margaret Thatcher was an example of this when she said that there was no such thing as society. There were individual men and women and families, and that our first duty was to look after ourselves. Then, only after that, doing perhaps what one could in a spirit of charity for one's neighbour on a strictly reciprocal, almost contractual basis. But as nationalists, it's our duty to reject this individualism, to reject this ignoring of social obligation. Because our first duty is to our race. Looking after our families, yes, is a natural part of that, a natural reflection of that concern for our race. But we should never elevate our self-interest or even our family's interests above those of our race. Because let's face it, on a purely individual, pragmatic, dare I say, sensible basis, there might be many circumstances where it might be convenient or sensible for us as individuals or for our families to favour immigration as a short-term expedient. We can all think, quite easily think, of affluent families, affluent individuals who benefit from having access to cheap imported labour, but who don't have to live next door to the people they employ. The former Labour leader, and who knows, in a week or two's time, might be Chancellor of the Exchequer for all we know, but the former Labour leader, Ed Miliband, strangely enough, said something very sensible about this many years ago when talking about immigration. He said in an interview, Ed Miliband himself said that immigration, the balance of advantage from immigration, looked very different depending on whether you were someone who was wanting to build a conservatory or some other extension to your house, or whether you were a tradesman whose living depended on building conservatories. And we could extend that analogy in many directions. Economic liberalism looks very good if you're just after cheap food, much less so if you're a farmer. Economic liberalism can look very good if you're a shareholder, much less so if you're a worker. Economic liberalism can look very good if you own multiple properties and benefit from rental income on a large scale. Less so if you're trying to get onto the housing ladder. And increasingly, economic and social liberalism, even in different ways equally toxic, economic liberalism and social liberalism increasingly go hand in hand. Because if the values of our nation are hyper-individualist, what it really means is that people are viewed as consumers and as labour to be exploited, as cogs in the global greed machine. Those who benefit from that global greed machine, those whose special ingenuity, honed by generations, is devoted to refining the operations of that global greed machine, are very often, not always of course, not always, but disproportionately often, of a different ethnic background to ourselves. And during the very early stages of the First World War, back in 1915, G.K. Chesterton wrote a poem called The Secret People. In just a few lines, Chesterton traced the history of the English, sacrifices our people had made in wars that they barely understood. He was referring, of course, because he was writing in 1915, at the start of the First World War, he was very aware of the fact that this was the 100th anniversary, this was the centenary of the last time that we had fought on Western European soil at Waterloo. He referred specifically in his poem to the last time we'd fought a century beforehand against Napoleon. He was conscious of the fact that it was the centenary. And in some of the lines that I'll quote here, he's comparing that time to his own time. We, of course, are now 111 years further on from Chesterton. We can recognise the themes that he was addressing. Chesterton wrote that the squires, our masters, bade us fight and never scorned us again. Weak if we be forever, could none condemn us then. Men called us serfs and drudges. Men knew that we were men. In foam and flame and Trafalgar, on Albuera plains, we did and died like lions to keep ourselves in chains. We lay in living ruins, firing and fearing not the strange fierce face of the Frenchman who knew for what they fought, and the man who seemed to be more than a man we strained against and broke. And we broke our own rights with him. And still we never spoke. Our patch of glory ended. We never heard guns again, but the squire seemed struck in the saddle. He was foolish, as if in pain. He leaned on a staggering lawyer. He clutched a cringing Jew. He was stricken. Maybe after all he was stricken at Waterloo. Chesterton goes on to note that in the century that had passed since Waterloo, as he put it, we only know the last sad squires rode slowly towards the sea, and a new people takes the land. And still, it is not we. They have given us into the hand of new unhappy lords, lords without anger or honour, who dare not carry their swords. They fight by shuffling papers. They have bright, dead alien eyes. They look at our labour and laughter as a tired man looks at flies. Chesterton ends on an optimistic note, and one that we can take courage from more than a century later, more than a century on from Chesterton's time. Chesterton concludes, but we are the people of England. We have not spoken yet. Smile at us, pay us, pass us, but do not quite forget. It's been easy for our new masters to forget our people, to forget the people that Chesterton wrote of, not only in England, but throughout our disunited kingdom and throughout Europe. We, however, in this room, and people like us people who will watch this message on social media, people who will join us at meetings and on street corners and at leafleting sessions all across our land. We are the people who don't forget. For us, the political process is first and foremost about not forgetting. To be worthy of our ancestors, build Britain and Europe fit for our descendants. The fanaticism required for that struggle is what makes life worth living. Whatever it takes, we will have our country back. Pick up the torch handed down by the greatest Britons, the greatest Europeans. That torch will illuminate the darkest days. That torch will enlighten the deluded and stupefied masses. That torch will light our path to victory. We don't depend on hunting quick glory. For us, an election campaign is simply a means to an end. We set out clear objectives, and our political process is first and foremost a way to build consciousness, to give our people back their dignity, to make our people worthy of their ancestors. As for us, there is such a thing as society. Society is another way of saying race, a culture and a civilization based on race. Within our struggle, there's a place for every age and every ability, whether stewarding a march, pushing a leaflet through a letterbox, writing an article, making a speech, administering a brand. We are all part of a great national revolution, a great European renaissance. This city was the engine room of the greatest empire the world has ever seen. So in this city, we should all be proud to be part of the greatest movement of our times.